for anyone watching, I want to introduce Alejo Castro. He's a coffee producer responsible for honestly some of the most exciting coffees coming out of Costa Rica, but also steward of the environment and a champion of ecological preservation. Alejo, you likely know, but we initially came across your family's coffee through our Boxcar Social project, and I think two things grabbed our attention. Firstly, we're so used to Costa Rican honey processed coffees and some natural coffees coming off tasting very nutty. Sometimes they can be linear, sometimes one-dimensional. I think it was the 2018 or 2019 harvest of the Natural Cultura that honestly just took us aback a little bit because it popped with layers of articulate red fruit. It had vibrant acidity, layers of chocolate. Also with that, we had seen Patrick's offerings, and Patrick from April, he had carried multiple different varieties and processes from you, and obviously it became apparent very quickly that Volcán Azul was doing some very innovative projects within the coffee industry. I want to start with seasonality because there's one other thing that became very apparent about you and your family's coffees. Freshness of green has been kind of one of the lesser visible aspects of producing high quality coffee, at least on a consumer level. I think somewhat recently, the integrity of green coffee and age has entered industry consciousness a bit. But we noticed with Volcán Azul coffees that they tend to age really well. And so we were tasting your coffees from Volcán Azul months and months and months after harvest and production. So I kind of want to use that to ask you two different questions. And we can circle back around to it. But one of them, I'd love for you to speak about Costa Rican harvest, what that looks like from a calendar perspective, and also what you're doing on the farm right now. We tried to have a conversation yesterday. Didn't work out because of internet issues, but you're on the farm, and this is a busy time for you. So I'd love for you to speak to, again, what a calendar year of harvest looks like in Costa Rica, but also then to speak to what it means to take into consideration that calendar year and process in producing stable coffee that doesn't age as poorly as so many of the coffees we see.
Great. Well, I'll start with the beginning. So the beginning for us at the farm to manage the plantations will be as soon after the harvest is done. So now we have to start managing the plantation. So we have to make a lab test about the soil analysis of what we have to add to the soil. What food do we need to give to the soil for the tree to develop the new cherries, the new coffee beans for the upcoming harvest. Then we have to start also planting new plantations, the older plantations, if we have to prune them. This all happens after the harvest, which will be in April. Mm-hmm. So in April, we start with all this work this is all happening in the field. So managing the plantation, planting new plantations, controlling all diseases, and this will stop when the harvest starts again. So right now we are doing the last jobs in the field. We are finishing giving the last fertilization to the coffee. We are trying to protect the trees from fungus diseases because right now it's raining a lot. Mm-hmm. And now we're starting to have the first ripened cherries. Last year, we had an early rain at the farm. Mm-hmm. It was very unusual, but that early rain in January led to a blossom in our plantations. So now we're going to have a small peak in the next week. So
it's so interesting. Okay,
we're going to start the harvest sooner than usual this year, but then we will stop and we will wait until the dry season is already here. Mm-hmm. And we're going to continue with this new harvest. And so right now we are finishing preparing the meal. Mm-hmm. This year we made a very big investment in our meal. So our idea, what you were telling about that our coffees last longer, the secret for us is to slow dry our coffees.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to be able to slow dry our coffees, sometimes they take around 15 even 20 days to dry, for example, a natural. We need to have more space because every day we are going to have coffee coming into our mill. So we need space. So what we did this year was to double the size of our drying patios to sun dry the coffees.
Mm-hmm.
And also we installed two extra dryers called guardiolas. Those are drum dryers, so they are spinning around really slowly with some. It's not very hot air, but with controlled air temperature. And so if we have more capacity, we are going to be able to give more time to the coffees
Right.
to dry. And that's the main key of that's why micro mills can do a better job, because we
Mm-hmm.
control the coffee, the volumes coming from our farm. We only mill our own coffee, and so we can do it very slowly. And with this way, our process, we're going to have a better water activity in
Mm-hmm.
our coffees.
But it's an
And
important
at the end,
consideration. Sorry to interrupt, but using mechanical dryers, it could be used in a few different ways, right? I mean, I think what we've seen in some other countries in Central and South America are mechanical dryers being used to actually dry more quickly. So probably an important note that Volcán Azul uses mechanical dryers to actually dry more slowly and in a more controlled way, right?
that's the important thing. You visited us this year, so you now understand everything about our process.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, a big mill, they are getting a lot of coffee every day. They have to dry very fast. They dry in about 36 hours the coffee. In our case, it's around 10 to 15, even 20 days. So they use higher temperatures. They use around 70 degrees Celsius. We use around 40, 45 degrees Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
And we also don't do it continuously. We stop those mechanical dryers to give a chance to the humidity inside the bean, in the middle of the bean, to go out slowly
Mm-hmm.
from out of the bean.
Right.
And this is because if we do it continuously, we will over dry the outer part of the bean, and we will still have some humidity in the center
Right.
of the bean. That's why the water activity won't be as good if we do it very quickly.
And can you explain briefly what water activity is?
The water activity is basically how the humidity is inside or goes around the bean. So if you over dry the outer part and you have a lot of humidity in the center of the bean, your water activity won't be as good. So it won't be as stable in all the bean,
Mm-hmm.
in the end. So, and it will be damaged sooner, the quality of that coffee.
Super important point. I can't. It's hard to explain from on the roaster side of things, and this has been the case for ages. It's the bane of so many roasters' existence. You cup a pre-ship sample of coffee, and it tastes amazing, and it is devastating. And it happens all the time from every country. There are no countries that are immune to the discrepancy, and there's a lot that goes into it in terms not just drying but also shipping conditions, but it can be really devastating, and it's been really an important mark of Volcán Azul's coffees that the stability is. I'm telling you, like in this moment, we are roasting 3 of your coffees right now, and we've just tasted the very first batch of the SL28, which I'm just so excited about that coffee. It's wild. We'll get into that a little bit later. But before we go further, I mean, I'd love if you could speak briefly about Volcán Azul in terms of its history, in terms of its multi-generational history, and how that culminated in this moment, putting Volcán Azul at the forefront of innovation in coffee production.
First of all, we are really proud of our tradition. It began over 200 years ago. Producing and exporting over 180 years ago, but we found out that 200 years ago we were already. Behind me you can see that drawing. That his father, he was already selling coffee and trading coffee in 1801. So we found some documentations that proves that. So he wasn't producing, but he was already trading coffee in 1801. So over 200 years of tradition with coffee. Then his daughter married to the first Alejo, and he was already producing and exporting coffees from Costa Rica in the 1830s. So from the side of my father. So the first Alejo was exporting the coffees to England back then, and for us it's really exciting to have all that documentation of his trips to England to sell the coffee back then. It was more difficult to travel than it is today. It was using sail ships. He had to go to Cape Horn in Argentina to go up to Europe to sell the coffees, and he did that journey over 20 times. So for us, we are really proud of that tradition. That from the side of my father, but also from the side of my mother. They came from Germany to the south of Mexico first in the 1890s. So it's also an old coffee tradition. So basically we have this old tradition that I believe, like I always say, that instead of blood running through our veins, we have coffee running through our veins. And they were pioneers back then. Both of the families, and for us it's a very big inspiration.
You have managed to respect the history of your family and their work in coffee while still innovating and still having a very contemporary approach to coffee production in certain ways. And we can talk about a few different things here, but why don't we start with processing? You've been experimental with processing methods. I think that when many people think of Costa Rica, we think of washed or honey process. I'm curious to know, what has Volcán Azul done traditionally, and who and when, who's responsible and when for the more contemporary processing methods that we've seen?
First of all, the idea of all these experiments is to improve our quality. And we want to do this because we want to honor our ancestors and producing the best coffee, trying to be one of the best coffees in the world. We have found letters from my great grandfathers, and they were also experimenting with new techniques back then. So it's not something new that we are doing new experiments. Of course, everything has evolved, and what we have right now is different. So with new processes, like for example, because we used to process everything as fully washed back then, and not maybe one or two varieties. I was the one who started with these new processes, first with honey processes in 2013. I started with that process. The next year with naturals, and 2 years ago with the anaerobics.
Did you and your parents, or was there any intergenerational disagreement about processing? Was there ever any pushback or disagreement, even from a taste perspective, in what processing should be done, or was it always kind of a consensus that these more experimental processes at whatever time was the right direction to go in?
Well, of course, at the beginning, I needed to prove that all these new varieties, first of all, gave us that they can give us a great quality. That was the most important thing, because back then there was the people here the traditional way of thinking about coffee is that if it had fermentation, it wasn't something good. And with all these new processes, we are giving more fermentation to the coffee. So I had to prove that we can manage to do that in a way that is a clean fermentation. You're not giving any funkiness that is not good for the flavor of the coffee. So at the beginning, I was just starting, so I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, and also the process was way more difficult. We used to process only washed coffees, and we started with honey that are very sticky. So we were struggling with the process, and of course, my parents, they had second thoughts of what if it was the best way to process the coffee, because I remember trying to deal with the coffee stock in different machines, and all the process was stopped because we couldn't advance because of that.
Yeah.
But now we have more experience doing this, and we now know how to deal with these new processes.
Yeah, the persistence is amazing, because of course, like with any,
they are really happy with the result. So
good.
So right now, I think they back me up with all these new processes.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, I think that they are unequivocally delicious coffees, but of course, they also taste very different. I mean, comparing the washed Caturra with even the natural, but of course the anaerobics, we're talking about really different flavor profiles. So it's totally a credit to your parents that they have been open-minded with regards to the flavors of coffee and certainly the normative claims about what's good or bad for production. I'd love to chat with you about the anaerobics for a second, because with all these things, they can be a somewhat controversial topic within the coffee industry. As with any new process, as with anything new in general that goes into coffee, there tends to be a pushback of some kind. I've been excited to talk to you about these anaerobics. I spent 5 months being excited to taste them after tasting them on the farm, because they blew my mind. They were incredibly articulate, but more than just articulate, they were specifically varietally expressive. We have tasted some anaerobic coffees from different countries, of different varieties, of different lengths of anaerobic fermentation, that all taste somewhat similar. They tend to be like red gummy and have a lot of cinnamon. And what struck me about Volcán Azul's anaerobic processing is that you feature quite a few different varieties processed anaerobically, and they all expressed their varietal flavor and aroma so clearly. Again, it made me extremely excited for how anaerobic processing can be done to foreground particular characteristics within coffee. I'm curious how you came across anaerobic fermentation, even in building a timeline for what motivates the coffee industry. I'm curious how you came across anaerobic fermentation and what the kind of impetus was to try it with your coffee. Like, was there an anaerobic coffee that you tasted that kind of excited you and pushed you in that direction?
With anaerobics at the beginning, I heard about them and tried some of them a few years ago, but I think those anaerobics, they were mixed with strange stuff. So in my mind, I was a little bit, I don't know, I was not sure, because for me, I wanted that our coffees are pure.
What kind of strange stuff were they mixed with?
Strange stuff like cinnamon or something like that.
So we did see it. Even Daily Coffee News put out an article about that there was actually cinnamon being put in, which is ironic because many people think even unadulterated anaerobic process has a bit of a cinnamon quality. So it all became very confusing for a moment.
I know in some places they add strange stuff, so I was not sure about the process. But 2 harvests ago, with a very good partner, he is a roaster in Denmark called Soren Stiller. We started to make some experiments with small tanks, and with not adding any strange stuff, only the natural ingredients, the coffee, and the natural yeast coming from our field, because there are natural yeast and germs and things that from the farm. And at the end, from that first experiment, we had a great result. The coffee tasted really nice. We highlighted some of the original flavors we already have from our terroir. I know we are going to talk a little bit about that later. But we have amazing flavors from our farm, from the conditions we already have, and we also have great varieties that are giving us great flavors. So I don't want to hide those flavors. I want to highlight them, and that's our idea with our anaerobic process. We're not adding anything strange. We are just letting the natural yeast from our farm to work and to do all that.
What was the first variety?
Excuse me?
What was the first variety that you had processed anaerobically?
Caturra.
It was the Caturra. Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yes.
So probably, I mean, you can speak to this, but Caturra makes up the majority of what Volcán Azul produces.
Yeah, and I think if we start some experiments, we use first the Caturra because we know a lot about how this coffee tastes. So it's easy for us to make some comparisons. So yeah, it was the Caturra.
Can you briefly explain the anaerobic process? I mean, because it's a word that's spoken about quite a bit now, is certainly within the specialty coffee community, but I don't know that so many people have a grasp of really what's entailed in that process.
It's very simple. So the anaerobic process is it's a very old process. It's not something new. It's maybe new in coffee, but in the wine business or the beer business, they have been using this process for hundreds of years. So we are just adapting this to coffee. So basically, it's a closed tank, an hermetic tank that has a valve, so the oxygen can go out of the tank, and while the coffee will be fermenting, it will produce CO2, and that CO2 has a higher density, so the oxygen will go out of the tank, and we will only have a CO2 inside the tank. So that's why it's called anaerobic, out of oxygen. And during this process, we are measuring, of course, the time, the temperature, the pH or the acidity of the juice of the coffee, and also the sugar content, the brix content of this juice. And we're trying to make some recipes out of this. So we know some people prefer a little bit stronger flavors, more yogurt, strawberries. Dark chocolate flavors, and so we can add more temperature, more time, let the acidity to go a little bit more acidic. And if some people like cleaner flavors, so we can make it in a colder environment, and give less time to this. So yeah, that's basically our anaerobic process.
It's amazing to be able to, just the thought of being able to throttle particular characteristics of flavor or aroma, having that degree of control is is really incredible and really interesting. One thing that some people may have noticed, engaged heavily in the specialty coffee industry, is the price of anaerobic coffees, which tend to be a bit more expensive. And I've seen things posted or conversations where people cast doubt or say anaerobic coffees are hyped up, and it's because it's convoluted in part to auctions. Of course, once we start talking about auctions, the whole value proposition related to price starts to fall apart a little bit. But there are real reasons why, from a production and from a cost perspective, anaerobic coffees are more expensive. You can speak to this a little bit about just like the size of the batches of anaerobic processing versus processing washed or natural that you can accomplish given the physical constraints.
Yeah, of course. The first of all, for anaerobics, we can only make smaller batches, so we can have a controlled process. We normally use our best coffee because we want to highlight good flavors, and we only use center of the harvest with the right level of ripeness. We want to have more sugar for that process to happen. So we measure bricks before we pick those cherries. So it will be around 28 bricks. And also we use some of the varieties that are a little bit more expensive. For example, the geisha. The reason why geisha is more expensive in our case is because the production per hectare, the yield per hectare is a lot lower than, for example, like a Tura. So that's for us the main reason to sell our geishas more expensive. It's at the end per hectare we are maybe having the same revenue.
Right.
But yeah, that's something some people don't know.
Yeah.
And also when we use all the tanks, we can only do small batches of these anaerobics. We have to bring them to those tanks for many days and to be extra careful with that, and then to slow dry those coffees. So yeah, it's definitely we need to give extra work to those.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think what's so interesting about some of the innovation that's happening in coffee production is that, and wine as well, right? I mean, when you start speaking of terroir, we receive the word terroir with like a degree of mysticism. Like there's this magical thing about place that exists. And as much as I love to get swept up in the romanticism of that kind of phrasing, I think what excites me about some of the experimentation is the isolation of variables so that we can actually understand where some of these flavors come from, and it empowers producers to make decisions that produce those amazing soul-touching sensory experiences that coffee or other beverages can deliver. So again, isolating for process, isolating for variety, what you can see is that, when you plant SL28 in Costa Rica, in a very particular place within Costa Rica, you can see what the expression of the variety does in that place. And it almost allows you to speak to terroir in a sense even more than if you just have this kind of impenetrable package of variables at play. So anyway, that's one thing that really excites me about what farms like yours and your families are doing. Yeah.
It is measured. The terroir is something true. It's not something that we just we invented to sell our coffee. Because of the conditions we have differences in temperature that makes us have a higher bricks content in the mucilage of our coffee. The soil is different, so we can have different nutrients. But this terroir, I think it's very interesting for consumers because it gives us a great diversity of flavors, and it's nice to have always a different kind of coffee. And that's why it's important to respect this terroir and to showcase the flavors that we can generate from our conditions.
Yeah. Something you talk about, even when when you were here, you spoke to it at Temperance, is Volcán Azul's commitment and orientation towards ecological preservation. Truly, honestly, in the spirit of Costa Rica as a country in general, a country that's been world leading with regards to prioritizing ecological preservation, and we know that such a wild degree of biodiversity exists in Costa Rica. I'm wondering if you could speak to that orientation towards environmental preservation and what Volcan is doing now, and what the kind of outlook is towards that bent.
It's one of our pillars. We have three pillars. Our philosophy has three pillars, which is, of course, the quality of the coffee, the tradition that we already talked about, and the conservation. So we have large rainforest areas. We have over 1,500 hectares that our family owns and that we protect. And for example, my father started to buy larger rainforest areas in the 1980s. It's something we believe in our family, and it brings us a lot of joy to be in touch with nature and to have this conservation. So that's one thing. We have large areas where we have conservation, but also we are trying to use. We have from all our farms. We produce in 1/3 of the area we have.
Mm-hmm.
But we also want to reduce the impact we are doing in the areas we produce. Mm-hmm. So the first step we did was to stop using insecticides, because we also have bees. You have tried out the honey that we produce in our farm. So we don't want to use insecticides. Of course, we need to use some fungicides because that's a big issue here. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to use as little as possible of any product.
Right.
And the other step was planting more trees inside our plantations. And so the first step was planting windshields alongside all our plantations. Mm-hmm. And next year we're going to start with something new. We were going to make some agroforestry plantations. Mm. So we're going to have more trees. When we plant a new plantation, we're going to start planting more trees. And the idea is to have a bigger biodiversity of birds, insects, and trees inside the plantations. We have some studies that if we have many types of birds, we can control some insects that are harmful to the coffee. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the broca. I don't remember right now the name in English, but it's a bug that makes a hole inside the bean.
Yeah, so the coffee bean. Oh my gosh, now I'm forgetting.
Quality goes down. and if we have many types of birds, we can control those insects. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's basically what we. And the idea with this is to be sustainable, and that our tradition that started many years ago will continue for many years to come.
I can see you, but you're frozen. So give me 1 second. Okay, you're back. That's really exciting. Amazing. I'm so excited to see where that initiative goes. Kind of in that spirit, I'm curious to hear from your perspective. You hear it from coffee consuming countries' perspective, maybe overweighted what their opinions are in this. But I'm curious to hear where you see the coffee industry going as it is relevant to you, or even where you hope to see it going. again, more from a coffee producing perspective?
Well, I think the pandemic, of course, is not something we wanted or anything, but has accelerated some of the things that were already happening. So now coffee has become maybe more intimate for people. They used to go more to cafes. Now, in some areas where they have lockdowns, they have to make their own coffee at home. So it has become more intimate, more ceremonial. So people are maybe, because you understand a lot about the coffee, your baristas understand a lot, but when the consumers start brewing those coffees at home, it gets more intimate. They start understanding more that the difference of the different of the terroir, the variety of the different flavors of varieties. So I think people are getting more interested of the coffees they are getting, and I think this has been accelerated by the pandemic and and with this, that the people now have a closer yeah, now they are closer to the coffee.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the coffee industry is heading. People more aware of where their coffees are going. But you have already done a big job with this. That you give a lot of information to your customers about where the coffees are coming, and this is something that was already happening. Maybe it will get faster with all of what's happening right now.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. I mean, we certainly see a shift to consumption of coffee more to a household, and how that, I think it's early to see how that translates with regards to two things: buying patterns, the kinds of coffee people are buying, but maybe more importantly, certainly more importantly, what motivates people to buy specific coffees over another. Obviously, it's the Boxcar Social Project, and of course now our Subtext project, where thankfully we've had the opportunity to work directly with you, which has been really exciting. Half of our menu are Volcán Azul coffees right now, and again, to be able to feature one farm to make up a good portion of your menu, and for that farm's coffee to have such a wide breadth of articulation of flavor. That's the kind of stuff that excites people like me and the people on my team so much. So it really is such a pleasure to work with Volcán Azul, because you've done the heavy lifting in producing coffees with that tell their own story so much. Not to sound too cliche, but is there anything, I'm curious, not to push you in a negative direction here, it doesn't have to be, but is there anything that you really hope to see change about the coffee industry?
I would like to see maybe stronger bonds between all the actors, because at the end, to produce, we are all behind trying to produce a great cup of coffee, which is at the end what we are looking for. I want to see a stronger bond, but it's something we are already doing with you, for example. But a stronger bond between the farmer, the mill, the importer, the roaster, and the cafe. So in our case, this is already happening. You come to our farm, you see what's happening over there. We can discuss what types of coffee do you want, and at the end we end up with a strong partnership, where we are working together to produce a great cup of coffee. Then I go to Toronto and I visit your place, your roastery. I understand what you're doing over there now. When I come back to Costa Rica, I can see, no, they need this type of coffee. They need, they are looking for this. I can change some things in my production. So at the end, the outcome, what we are both looking for is to have a great cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe that's something I want to see more. It's getting bigger, these stronger bonds between roasters and cafe owners with the farmer and the mill owners.
No, I think it's incredibly important. We have heard much more lip service towards transparency within the coffee industry. We've heard lip service towards being oriented towards a direct trade or people using labels of direct trade just because they might have maybe visited an exporter in a producing country, but much more genuine, that these things like transparency, including information, right? Receiving information about pricing, which is important. I mean, we're starting to see more roasters become more price transparent, that coffees are going to farms instead of just buying from importers. And I don't want to slander importers. We work with some amazing importers that are the ones doing the incredible work and the ones building the relationships on the ground with producers. We need importers. We just need, with us, we've just made sure we're very selective with which importers we work with. We have very close relationships to them, and they connect us with producers, because it's not always the case that we can have relationships like with you where we can contact you directly so easily. But I'd love to see those kinds of things, transparency and pay equity, come from places of genuine relationship building as opposed to good PR, what makes a brand feel shiny and presentable.
I think now all the actors in this business, we have to add value to what we are doing. Importers can add a lot of value to all of this. They can make your life easier to bring the coffees to your place. But we need to be there has to be transparency. And I know in the past some importers, they didn't like that the roaster had communication with the producer. And I think at the end that's going to disappear. At least here in Costa Rica, I have seen many small farms, small families of farmers that now they can have this direct communication. They might use an exporter or an importer, but they have this good communication with the final with the roaster and the cafe owner.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I just have been anxious to talk to you after how exciting tasting your coffees has been in our roastery. They have held up so remarkably since we cut them at the farm. It's astounding to see coffee quality 9 months later hold up like that. Really incredible stuff. We have your washed coffee, your Caturra, the natural Caturra, and the Anaerobic Typica released right now, with the Anaerobic SL28 coming out soon and the Anaerobic Geisha to follow. So, but thank you so much for taking the time, Alejo. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really hoping to go back really soon to Toronto.
Amazing.
So to visit you, of course, Anna, that is still over there. But I think soon enough I will be over there as soon as the harvest will be done.
Amazing.